Can riboflavin increase NAD? To address why that may be true, let's take a look at the de novo NAD synthesis pathway, which is shown here. In this pathway, the amino acid tryptophan is converted by a series of enzymatic steps into NAD. And notice that B2 is there. Vitamin B2 is riboflavin. So riboflavin is a required cofactor for conversion of kynurenine into 3-hydroxykynurenine. So if vitamin B2 levels are suboptimal, then movement from tryptophan being converted into NAD will be inefficient or less effective. So with that in mind, is riboflavin intake correlated with blood intracellular levels of NAD? And that's what we'll see here. This is riboflavin intake versus NAD from 2023 through 2025, as I have 26 tests over that period. On the y-axis, we've got blood intracellular levels of NAD, and note that to measure that, I've been sending blood to Ginfinity. If you want to measure your own NAD levels, there's a discount link in the video's description. And on the x-axis, we've got the 7-day average riboflavin intake in milligrams per day. And to generate that information, I've been using Chronometer to track diet. Now note that I'm using the 7-day average dietary intake because I've realized that NAD levels change very quickly within just a few days. So a 7-day average should capture those effects better than looking at longer averages, say 30 or 40 days in between tests. So in terms of the correlation, we can see that there is a significant correlation between the 7-day average riboflavin intake with NAD levels, with a correlation coefficient of 0.51 and a p-value that's less than 0.05 at 0.01. But note that nicotinic acid and NMN obviously also increase NAD. And that's what we'll see here. First, starting out with my data for NAD versus niacin intake, which includes nicotinic acid. On the y-axis, we've got NAD, and now on the x, we've got the 7-day average niacin intake. And here we can see that there is a strong correlation between NAD with niacin, with a correlation coefficient that's 0.75. Anything greater than 0.7 is considered a strong correlation, and that p-value is far below 0.05. Now, in terms of nicotinic acid as its contribution to NAD levels, anytime my average niacin intake is greater than about 50 milligrams per day, the higher intakes of niacin are coming exclusively from nicotinic acid supplementation. So with that in mind, there are two data points where I've got NAD levels that are higher than 40 micromolar that are on the left side of that green line. In other words, low niacin intake. How was I able to get higher levels of NAD? Well, that's because I also supplemented with NMN, which also increases NAD, which is what we'll see here. And once again, NAD on the y-axis. Now we're looking at the 7-day average for NMN intake. And here, the correlation is significant with a p-value less than 0.05, but the correlation coefficient is less strong at 0.44. So what this indicates, at least in my data, it may be different for others, is that nicotinic acid can raise NAD at far lower doses relative to NMN. So when considering that nicotinic acid and NMN both increase NAD in my case, is that correlation for riboflavin with NAD independent of nicotinic acid and NMN intake? So to address that, I removed days or removed tests where I supplemented with nicotinic acid. So that's any of the tests where I had niacin intakes greater than 50 milligrams per day. And I also removed any tests that had NMN where I was supplementing with that. That then left 12 tests without nicotinic acid or NMN supplementation. So now we're going to take a look and see, is riboflavin significantly correlated with NAD after removing nicotinic acid and NMN supplementation, which is what we can see here, with NAD levels on the y-axis and once again the 7-day average for riboflavin intake on the x. And here we can see that there is still a significant correlation for riboflavin versus NAD, as that p-value is right at the border of statistical significance, 0.05, and the correlation coefficient is 0.59. In other words, when riboflavin intakes have been towards the higher end of my range, 3.7 milligrams per day, that's significantly correlated with my higher NAD levels. And I shouldn't say my highest, because my highest has been 67 micromolar coming from nicotinic acid or NMN supplementation. Now, as a quick note, note that 3.7 milligrams per day of riboflavin is about 3x the RDA. And even with just 3x the RDA, that doesn't get me to go from 30 micromolar to 67 micromolar, which I can only achieve with high-dose nicotinic acid. On the other hand, when riboflavin intake is at the lower end of my intake range, 2.7 milligrams per day, we can see that that's significantly correlated with NAD levels that are on the lower side of my range, around 20 micromolar. So when considering that nicotinic acid and NMN increase NAD, if I supplement with them, does riboflavin even matter? This is a relatively small bump, 5 micromolar or so, whether I'm on the higher end of my riboflavin intake range, 3.7 milligrams per day, or on the lower end. So as you can see, my average is somewhere around 25. So does it go to 30 or does it go to 20, depending on if riboflavin is at the higher or the lower end of my range. So if I supplement with the other precursors, does riboflavin even matter? Why do I care about riboflavin? Well, a big part of my approach is trying to kill two birds with one stone, or more birds if I can. Actually trying to keep birds alive, but you guys, you know what I mean. So increasing riboflavin may decrease homocysteine, and that's another reason why I'm interested in potentially going higher, or actually going higher for riboflavin. And that's what we'll see here. So starting with homocysteine, there are at least 3 ways to decrease its levels. The first way, which is the most popular way, is with betaine or trimethylglycine. Now, I've tried that in the past with high-dose trimethylglycine, 4 grams per day, and unfortunately, that didn't make a dent in lowering my homocysteine. I've also tried high-dose serine, the amino acid serine plus vitamin B6, with 3 different tests going sequentially higher for serine intake over those 3 tests, and that too didn't make an impact on my homocysteine levels. The third way is with the combination of methylfolate and methyl B12, which I've put the check mark there because that's significantly correlated with about a 10% lower level of homocysteine in my data. And if you're interested in seeing those correlations, they're on the correlations tier on Patreon. But note that riboflavin is a part of this story, and for a long time, or until now, I've neglected it, unfortunately. So how does riboflavin play into the potentially lowering homocysteine story? Well, starting with dietary intake of folate, that's converted into tetrahydrofolate, TH4 folate, which is then converted into 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate, TH4 folate, and then in the presence of MTHFR, so methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, and riboflavin, that's converted into 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, which then in combination with B12 or methyl B12, in terms of what I'm supplementing with, that can then decrease homocysteine as it's converted into methionine. Now note that I don't have the genetic condition where MTHFR is less active, thereby leading to higher homocysteine, as my homocysteine levels have been about half of where they currently are now, about 20 years ago. So whether this is aging or dietary insufficiency or both, that's more likely relative to the genetic issue. So if I go higher for riboflavin, can I then increase 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate and then improve the conversion of homocysteine into methionine, as now the efficiency of the reaction for folate plus B12 and converting that into methionine with homocysteine should be more effective. Is that true? Did it work? So I just sent blood to Ginfinity for NAD analysis in conjunction with all of the other blood tests for blood test number 3 in 2025. And I did that on April 22nd. So stay tuned for that story, an update to this story coming sometime soon. If you've ever wondered what's optimal for biomarkers, well, I have a new Patreon tier dedicated just to that. So these aren't the reference ranges. This is what's optimal based on how each of these biomarkers changes during aging and their association with all-cause mortality risk. It currently has more than 2 hours of video content, 45 published references. So if you're interested in that, check it out. And if you're interested in more about my attempts to biohack aging, I post at least twice a day in each of these 5 Patreon tiers. And before you go, we've got a whole bunch of discount and affiliate links that you can use to test yourself that can help support the channel, including ultalabtest.com, which is where I get the majority of my blood tests, the clearly filtered water filter, which I use every day, at-home metabolomics, which I do at every test, oral microbiome composition, which I still haven't solved, NAD testing, as I mentioned in this video, epigenetic testing, at-home blood tests, at-home blood testing with Cyfox Health, which includes the DNA methylation test ConquerAging, which isn't included in True Diagnostics panel, just as a note. Green tea, which I drink every day. Diet tracking with Chronometer, also mentioned in the video. Or if you'd like to support the channel, you can do that with the website Buy Me a Coffee. We've also got merch, so if you're interested in wearing the ConquerAging or Diet Trying brand, as I've got on here, that link and all the other links will be in the video's description. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Have a great day.